and Eve story by Chan Thomas. Chapter 6, Cataclysms Revisited, Part 2. It's apparent that our present moon was created on ring 3, Phoebus on 5, and Deimos on 6. Ring 7 is vacant. That presents a real challenge. Whatever happened to the minor planet from ring 7? The closeness of Phoebus and Deimos to Mars tells us that rings 4, 5, and 6 close together a tremendous amount, most probably through a succession of events in the solar system causing the series of cataclysms on Earth. It's logical that ring 7 also would have closed towards Mars' ring, so that Mars would have captured the minor planet from ring 7, as well as Phobos and Deimos. Once orbiting around Mars, Lost could have come close enough to Earth to be stolen from Mars by Earth and be the moon satellite so well described on the idol and calendar gate of Tiwanaku. Further, the closeness of that satellite to Earth would be justification for the premise that Lost was stolen by Earth from Mars. The multitude of legends springing from the cataclysm of 11,500 years ago about Venus moving into orbit or Venus changing her orbit most probably describe the chapter of our present moon. Most probably describe the capture of our present moon from ring 3, which in its day, eons ago, evidently was a pretty fair planet with radiation belts orbiting around the sun. In any case, the now vacant ring 7, the records from Tiwanaku of a retrograde orbiting moon, the plethora of impact craters on the moon and Mars, and mountains of dense material buried in the mantle of the Earth as uncovered by perturbed orbits in our man-made satellites, and Bode's law, explained here to include orbits of both fundamentals and harmonics, now offer an orderly meaning to us. Instabilities in the solar system, which lead to capture of minor planets by major planets, may seem impossible or improbable. However, if we consider one minor instability in the solar system in the Earth's rotation, we can believe that major changes in stability are possible. You can find it in Encyclopedia Britannica. Mention is made of 2 astronomically abrupt changes in the Earth's rotation within the last 100 years. This planet of ours is not an inertial body. It's a complex motor generator system, as are the solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, its parent supergalaxy, and the universe in which we live. Realize also that astronomers of Tiwanaku recorded stability changes on the calendar gate in the Great Idol. In light of the fantastic stonework in Tiwanaku, characterizing the civilization which ended abruptly about 11,500 years ago, we can look at other great prehistoric works in stone which stand as mysterious monumental memorials to lost engineering techniques. There is Baalbek in Lebanon, formerly known as Heliopolis, where 3 huge stones are fitted together to make a platform 300 feet long. The mate to the largest stone still lies in a quarry southwest of town. That mate, believe it or not, weighs over 1,200 tons. What fantastic event would cause this prehistoric civilization to leave its tools figuratively hanging in midair? And prehistoric Sacsayhuaman, Peru, where a 20,000-ton monolithic block of stone lies with its steps upside down, overturned by some prehistoric supernatural wrath of nature, and there, as immobile as the silent boom of the kettle drums of eternity and space, stand walls of incredibly fitted huge stones. We hear so much about the stone statues of Easter Island. There is also a wall of gigantic, precisely fitted stones, suggestive of the same civilization as Saxaman and Baalbek. Giant stone statues are not exclusive to Easter Island. They can be found in the Tuamotu archipelago, on Nuku'va, Fativa, Ravia, and Pitcairn, and in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Those statues on Easter Island, which were buried up to their necks and recently excavated, show a geological environment the significance of which eluded the excavators. The lessons learned from the stratas in the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, and Canyon de Chile teach us to look for homogeneity. And there it is in the dirt walls of the excavations around the gigantic statues. They were all buried at once in a colossal inundation. It appears to be the reason for the tools being figuratively left in midair in the quarries of Easter Island as well as those in Baalbek. Mother Nature performs her own works in stone, which can serve as time clocks for us. Take Niagara Falls, for instance. When the falls first started, the river flowed over a cliff where the mouth of the gorge below the falls is today. There was no gorge. As the years went by, the water broke away the cliff bit by bit, year after year, century by century, to form the 7-mile-long gorge, which reposes below the falls today. For the past 100 years, the breakaway of the Canadian Falls has averaged approximately 4.5 feet per year. When the falls were young, when the gorge's first 2 to 3 miles or so were being carved out by the river, the breakaway was faster since the falls were narrower, the depth of the water passing over the cliff deeper, and the height of the cliffs greater. A reasonable early breakaway figure would be 6 to 6.1 feet per year, which would make the age of the falls and gorge below them about 7,000 years. The birth of both falls and gorge coincided with oceanographic data, which tells us that the oceans all over the world took a sudden rise of over 200 feet and stayed risen, gradually lowering in height since then to their levels of today. St. Anthony's Falls in the upper Mississippi River in Minnesota bears another telltale story in nature's series of recording time clocks. The gorge below those falls is 8 miles long. Over the past century, the breakaway has averaged 5.5 feet per year. If we repeat that same reasoning process that we used in analyzing the gorge below Niagara Falls, we come up with the same figure for the age of St. Anthony's Falls in the gorge below them, approximately 7,000 years. These datings, plus others, such as the eruptions of lava around the pyramid of Cucasillo in Mexico, lead us to a date of the last cataclysm, Noah's flood, of somewhere around 7,000 years ago. Earlier datings, 11,500 years ago, for the abrupt end of the Laurentian Basin ice cap in Canada and the ice cap in southwestern Australia, plus the same date for the jamming burial of countless animals, fish, mammals, birds, and humans in the Purjek Marsh in southeastern Australia, plus the same date for the abrupt end of civilization in Tiwanaku by an inundation, plus scientific data from all over the world showing an abrupt worldwide climatic change at the same time, established 11,500 years ago as a close estimate for Adam and Eve's cataclysm, the one preceding Noah's flood. If we accept Tiwanaku's dating, it was approximately 11,560 years ago. Isn't it interesting that the New Stone Age and the Old Stone Age datings coincided with the times of Noah's cataclysm and Adam and Eve's cataclysm? It is plain that each cataclysm leaves this planet with less than 1% of all life surviving. In those meager spots all over the world where some humans survive, what is left for them to live by and with? Who has even a shovel? Whatever clothes they have, how short a time those clothes will last. you can understand how each day, the entire day, total effort is spent in finding food, as in plant food, hunting and fishing just to survive. The fight for survival is as extreme as it is unimaginable. Most of those who survive cannot teach language, ethics, mathematics, history, government, or anything of what we regard as classical education. If there are children, Dad tells his kids all about the inundation, and they believe him because he's their dad. By the time there are grandchildren, they don't believe a word he says because, well, he has to be a little off his rocker to tell stories like that. In lost my place there. Government, anything like Dad, inundation. They don't believe him. Anyway, he must be a little bit off his rocker to tell stories like that. In a matter of a few generations, the cataclysm becomes a verbal legend because who has something to write with or on? And of those who survive, who has the language skills it takes to write even if he did have writing tools? Furthermore, who has time to write or teach anything when the top priority of each and every day is survival? Let's look back to dating. Meager data shows us the cataclysm previous to Adam and Eve's to be about 18,500 years ago. The previous one, 29,000 years ago. And thanks to mathematician Jess Hale's Structures of Nature, the previous one computes at 43,750 years ago. Mathematically, its function is that of a helicoid. Of all the correlations of data, I regard one of the most striking to be that of Shenandoah Cave in Iraq. The Smithsonian Institution expedition headed by Ralph S. Solecki and the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities shared in this work. Carbon-14 datings showed the boundaries between layers laid down by successive civilizations to be commensurate with the dates of cataclysms 7,000, 18,500, 7,000, 11,500, 18,500, and 29,000 years ago. Plus the incredible fact that no carbon-14 was deposited in the cave during the Caspian Sea North Polar era from 29,000 years ago to 18,500 years ago. It's entirely logical, since the cave would have been so close to the North Pole as to plausibly have been closed off by a polar ice cap. Consequently, no living matter could have entered the cave, and it takes living matter to absorb carbon-14 for us to find an end date. This crude cave is as much memorial to the last four cataclysms as Tiwanaku. Speaking of memorials, has anyone ever lived through a cataclysm and written of his experience, leaving a personal memorial to the occasion? Of course. If we first look at Genesis 3, cataclysms are mentioned there. Noah's inundation, the last one 7,000 years ago, Adam and Eve's 11,500 years ago, and the previous one of 18,500 years ago, barely mentioned in Genesis 11:4. Two other stories exist, and they are most intriguing. One is from Noah's time, and the other in Adam and Eve's time from Greece. In 1849, Austin Henry Layard started excavating the mound of Tionjik on the banks of the Tigris River. It was there that he discovered the fabulous city of Nineveh, previously known only through the Old Testament. He discovered the palace built by the bloody emperor Sennacherib. Bernapal, a grandson of Sennacherib, by one of his concubines, had added a library to the palace. He then sent emissaries out to comb his kingdom for original tablets worthy of being in his library, and had the emissaries borrow the tablets and bring them to the palace. As Sir Prinapal had exact copies made of each one and returned the originals to their rightful owners, he had some 30,000 copies made in clay tablets and put them all in his library. These were the tablets which Layard found. Among the tablets were 12 comprising the Epic of Gilgamesh, a man who was, at that time, a legendary king of the first dynasty of Iraq, closely following the Great Deluge. He has since been shown to have been a real human being. Gilgamesh sought the secret of eternal life, driven to do so by the death of his friend Enkidu. He was told that he should find a man by the name Utnapishtim who had been granted eternal life by the gods. He found Utnapishtim, who Gilgamesh successfully persuaded to tell his story. Utnapishtim started that indeed he had been granted the secret of eternal life and was told by the gods, "O man of Surapuk, son of Ubartutu, abandon well, scorn possessions, save thyself, tear down thy house, and build a ship, let it be well measured." He described the ship he built, and from all principles of naval architecture, it was a ship which could not be tipped over square, probably meaning oblong after he built it. He launched it on no less than 8 shakedown cruises. Each time he would bring it back, caulk it with bitumen, and check it out again. Finally, he had a ship's mate, so he held a real Belshazzar's feast to celebrate its completion with beer, wine, venison, and mutton served to all who came. Imagine this in your own neighborhood. Some of his neighbors must have thought he was a real nut. On the very next day after the feast, he decided that it was time to load the ship and set it to sea on the cruise for survival. "I then loaded the ship. The whole harvest of life I loaded, my family, my friends, the beasts of the field, the cattle of the field, the craftsmen and the tools of their trades. I made them all embark. I then embarked and closed the door. As soon as a gleam of dawn shone in the skies darkened. Black clouds gathered. Inside them, Adad thundered. Soon all light had turned to darkness. Brother could recognize brother no more. The animals of the skies could no longer see each other." Utnapishtim then described the onslaught of the storm, which generated sheer all-out terror on the ship. Following that, for 6 days and night, wind and flood marched on. The holocaustic wind overwhelmed the land. When the 7th day dawned, the ill wind was stilled. The oceans, the flood, which had waged war like an army, was ceased. I opened the window and beheld the devastation, and all mankind was turned into mud. As high and as flat as the roofs lay the swamp, and thousands of dead, of man, of beast, of cattle, lay floating in the mire. And then proceeded to describe the bumping into the mountain, the release of the 3 birds, the bringing back of the leaf, followed by disembarkation and the building of an altar, and more. An addendum. Since going to press, an astronomer in Australia named Dr. Arthur Bless has observed a progressing phenomenon which he has no idea is directly related to the next cataclysm. He has observed through monthly measurements of the sun's surface temperature over the past 5 years that the sun's temperature is decreasing at a rate which predicts that it will go completely out by 1999 or 2000, which he cannot predict. What he cannot predict is that it will reignite very shortly after. What he has discovered is an authentication of the start of the next cataclysm predicted in the Adam and Eve story through scientific rationale, and by Nostradamus, Casey, and Scallion through clairvoyance. What Dr. Blessey predicts actually is the short period of time of utter darkness with the sun completely out, which Utnapishtim describes on page 101, first paragraph. It's interesting that Blessey authenticates the extremely unusual black darkness with Utnapishtim, which Utnapishtim describes as immediately following daybreak. If you want a complete technical explanation, it takes pages. Please send to 50 to Bengal Tiger Press. You can insert it in the back of your book. Done with the addendum. Undoubtedly, the story is the primeval version of Noah's flood, written thousands of years ago, covering many generations before Ezra dictated his version to 5 scribes and reconstructing Genesis 1, 2, and 3. One of the most important things about it is that we have a first-hand, on-the-spot report of the laying down of strata as we see exposed in the walls of the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, and Canyon de Chile, with a vivid description of the terrorizing wind and inundation which are part of the event. Language scholars say that for anyone to write such a description, he had to be there and see it with his own eyes. More important also, the great archaeologist Leonard Woolley found in Tepeshitim's rooftop high layer of mud in the 1920s, by then clay about 9 feet thick, in the Tigris-Euphrates rivers region. Further, beneath it, a civilization which was buried and totally different from any found above it. Of course, we have the more than 8,000 survival legends in the Malay Peninsula region as uncovered by the great legendarian Fraser. We have other survival legends by Southwestern American Indians and from Dane Bijan, the Navajo creation story by Paul G. Zulbrod. We have this striking legend. At the end of the 4th night, as they were at last about to end their meeting, they all noticed something white in the east. They also saw it in the south. It appeared in the west too, and in the north it also appeared. It looked like an endless chain of white mountains. They saw it on all sides. It surrounded them, and they noticed it was closing in on them rapidly. It was a high, insurmountable wall of water, and it was flowing in on them from all directions, so that they could not escape. Neither to the east, nor to the west, neither to the south, nor to the north could they escape. So, having nowhere else to go, they took flight into the air. They went higher and higher. They soared, it said. From this description of flight, and from the following parts of the legend, it is my interpretation that the entire legend is one from the cataclysm of 11,500 years ago. It would take years of work on my part to nail down the time of that one legend. I don't have years. Let's take the story, which we know is from 2 cataclysms ago. Historians tell us that for a 4,500 period before 7,000 years ago, there was no written history from anywhere in the world. India, Greece, and Egypt follow this characteristic. It's interesting that 7,000 plus 4,000 equals 11,000. I'm sorry, that 7,000 plus 4,500 equals 11,500 years, isn't it? In light of the priests of Egypt telling Solon of a great antediluvian Hellenic civilization, let's take a look at the Greek alphabet. It's written today as it has been for all of written Greek history, but the pronunciation is not the same. In the time of Euclid, the pronunciation was changed to the slang of their time. It is bold. Let's compare the modern to the old. That's on page 104. If you want to look at that, look at it, not reading it. It's crazy. If you read the old pronunciations out loud, it sounds very much like Polynesian. Plausibly, it is a summation of prehistoric Mayan words, which we can translate into English. Here, then, is the Greek alphabet. Overwhelmingly break the oceans, they inundate the land. Mother Earth receives the deep where obstructions are. Shores form, mighty winds rampage, where with oceans piling over oceans, they bury all that is living and moving. Where hills are, they vanish, buried, submerged with the earth of the motherland. Mountain peak alone stand forth before the onslaught of our planet, which abides little by little until there comes the cold wind. The motherland is now at the bottom of the earth, an abyss, a vast reservoir of frozen mud. There comes out of volcanoes vapors pouring forth with swirling smoke and molten lava. It appears that it tells the story of the cataclysm, which ended the Laurentian Ice Age, started the Old Stone Age, ended the Australian ice cap, and initiated the abrupt climatic change over the whole world as discovered in oceanography. in oceanography. Of course, it was the cataclysm through which Adam and Eve survived, ending a civilization in the Eastern Hemisphere. Traces, wisps of that civilization are found in the legends recorded by the Hindu historian Valmiki and told by the Polynesian tribes, such as the Maori. The story apparently was handed down verbally, generation by generation, through the 5,000-year period of no written history, and after Noah's or Antipashim's flood, when history started to be written, it became the basis for the Greek alphabet. Factual, legendary, or mythological, or maybe even historical or semi-historical, whichever it might be, the story is fascinating, isn't it? If you wish to pursue it further, read Don Antonio Betrez Jacore's History of Central America and James Churchward's The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward makes many mistakes, but his works are interesting reading. He is exacting treatment of the calendar gate. His exacting treatment of the calendar gate of Tiwanaku makes one question his sometimes cursory methods. History before the cataclysm of 11,500 years ago comes to us in the form of legends. We can understand those legends and their origins far better in the light of history of cataclysms. The Greek alphabet has existed in two forms through all of Greek history. Where did it come from before that? It appears that it is a direct transcendent of prehistoric Mayan or Naga. Perhaps the answer lies in the megaliths, runes, and glyphs ranging from Mato Grosso in Deutschland, Finland, England, and Friesland. All we can say at this time is that these are prehistoric secrets of the Hellenes. Now, we must leave the pleasure of enjoying our hypothesis and return to more serious considerations. Let's discuss the most elusive piece of the puzzle, the part which has taken 20 years to derive and fit into the puzzle, the trigger, the cause of cataclysms. My thoughts go back to George Cuvier challenge to the world of science, which he wrote in 1812. Discover the cause of these events. Dr. Hibbins, contemporary adjunct to that challenge, is really an inseparable part of it. Any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all of the facts. As the years went by and we remained dissatisfied with our concepts concerning the trigger, we concentrated on that part of the puzzle. It has taken 20 years to find satisfactory solution, one which answers all of the facts. The fascinating work of the Swedish physicist Hans Alfvén lighted the torturous path to the answer. In the 1950s, he discovered a kind of energy which nobody even thought existed, which he labeled magnetohydrothermic energy. Abbreviated, it's called MHD. Actually, it's a combination of magnetic, electrical, and physical forces. It can be described best with what I call a kitchen example. Suppose you took a glass cylinder containing mercury at room temperature, and everyone knows it's molten or liquid under those conditions. It's so dense that you can float a glass mirror on top of it. So let's do just that and make some scratches on the mirror. If you shine a light down on the mirror, the light beam will reflect on the ceiling and show images of the scratches in the mirror on the ceiling. Now let's put an agitator, like a miniature version of a washing machine agitator, in the bottom of the cylinder of mercury with a shaft or axle going through the bottom of the cylinder and fastened to the agitator. Let's put a handle on the end of the shaft sticking out at the bottom of the cylinder. We can twirl the agitator back and forth with the handle slowly, only because the mercury is so dense and heavy, and agitate the mercury in the glass cylinder. When we agitate the mercury in this fashion, we find that the slipperiness of the mercury atom to atom is so great that all of the motion in the agitator is absorbed by the mercury before it even reaches the top surface where the mirror is. The mirror won't budge. If we wind a wire around the glass cylinder and connect it to a battery, we will have an electromagnet. Following the same principles used in the doorbell of your home. There is an electrical current flowing around the cylinder and a magnetic field going through the cylinder end to end. Now we find that things have changed. When we rotate the agitator back and forth, the mercury acts as if it were plastic or near solid. The mirror makes all of the moves that the agitator does, showing that the mercury has lost its internal slipperiness and moving integrally as if it were almost solid. Alvin tried a refined version of this experiment in his laboratory, and this is how the phenomenon was discovered. It was first reasoned that tiny electrical charges called eddy currents were being generated in the mercury, which in turn were generating tiny local opposing magnetic fields, and this was causing the solidifying effect. He reasoned that if this were true, the larger the diameter he made the glass cylinder, the bigger the electrical current, and the stronger the magnetic field would have to be to maintain the same physical force link between agitator and mirror. He built another agitator vessel with a larger diameter cylinder of mercury and found the reverse to be true. The larger the diameter of the glass cylinder, the less magnetic field strength and electromagnetic current needed to maintain the physical force link between agitator and mirror. This seemingly broke all the rules of known physics and engineering. I'm going to read that paragraph one more time just because it's important. He built another agitator vessel with a larger diameter cylinder of mercury and found the reverse to be true. The larger the diameter of the glass cylinder, the less magnetic field strength and electrical current needed to maintain the physical force link between agitator and mirror. This seemingly broke all the rules of known physics and engineering. Heinz Alfvén realized that he had discovered the existence of a kind of energy traveling from the agitator to the mirror which was previously undetected by any scientist. His rigorous mathematical work in expanding James Clerk Maxwell's three ingenious equations for expressing electromagnetic radiation, radio broadcast to you, showed that there were electrical, magnetic, and physical force fields acting as a combined field between the agitator and the mirror. Alvin expanded his mathematical research to show that space is literally a sea of MHD energy, and that as weak as the magnetic field of any blue-white star is, it is strong enough to support an internal MHD energy structure within the star. Alvin's work also applied to any planet with only one each north and south magnetic pole. I have built several Earth current recording stations and know from personal observation that Earth currents are strong enough to support our planet's inner MHD structure. Now we know that the molten layers inside the Earth act just like the cylinder of mercury in Alfvén's experiment. As long as they are permeated with MHD energy, they act as if they were plastic or near solid. We also know that the shell of the Earth, which includes the oceans, the crust, a teeny part of the mantle, is not dynamically balanced as it stands today. Rough computations show that there is a huge torque tending to rotate the shell about the Earth's interior. Greenland and Antarctica could move towards the equator in less than half a day with the shell free to make the shift. As long as the inner MHD energy structure remains strong enough to make the molten layers act as near solids, the shell will not shift its position about the Earth's interior. To be sure, the shell is shifting ever so gradually. The subject is covered extensively in the paper Latitude and Longitude and the Secular Motion of the Pole by Dr. Markowitz of the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. However, at the time of a cataclysm, the entire solar system passes through a magnetic null zone in the Milky Way galaxy. These null zones are sometimes popularly called reversal zones, and so they are, for the magnetic fields on either side of the galactic null zones are in opposite directions. Some physicists have found that we are heading into another null zone at an accelerated rate. It is a known fact of geophysics that Earth's magnetic field strength, now over 30% less than 300 years ago, is decreasing faster and faster. We are indeed approaching a null zone. In any case, when going through a null zone, our planet's inner MHD energy structure is diminished to the extent that the outer shallow molten layer, 60 miles thick, is allowed to act as a free liquid. No longer does it bind the shell of the Earth to its interior, which starts 120 miles deep. as the mirror was bound through the mercury to the agitator by MHD energy in Haynes-Alphen's experiment. The shell of Earth is free to find a new dynamic balance about the Earth's interior. It shifts in direction, and the torque imbalance of the shell dictates it must go find a new balance. And the 60-mile deep, white-hot, 2,500 degree Fahrenheit molten layer beneath the outer shell lubricates the shift all the way. The trigger, then, is our planet's passage, along with the entire solar system, through a galactic scale magnetic null zone, diminishing the Earth's inner MHD energy to so low a level that the shallow molten layer, starting at 60 miles deep and extending 120 miles deep, is allowed to act as a free liquid lubricating layer between Earth's shell and solid interior. During each cataclysm, the shell finds a new dynamic balance, which is resolved when the shell has shifted into a position with the ice caps rotating equatorially and melting in the heat of the torrid zone. As they melt relatively fast, and they usually total around 8 million cubic miles of ice, as they do today, the oceans the world over, after the ice melts, rise about 200 feet with the newfound water, and new polar ice caps form on the areas that moved into the polar region. They will not be centered with our axis of rotation. So a new growing imbalance is created to grow as the new ice caps grow, to be resolved when the Earth, with the entire solar system, passes through another galactic null zone 10,500 years later. Regarding the shallow molten layer, some geophysicists and seismologists challenge its existence. In 1924, the great seismologist Benno Gutenberg derived from his earthquake seismographic records that the layer must be there. Since then, Hawaiian seismologists have said, of course, it's the source of the molten stuff volcanoes spew forth. And other seismologists say, well, it's there, but it's not molten. It's plastic or near solid. They're both right. It's molten and acts as a near solid because of its MHD content. Oceanography gives the answer. IGY data shows that oceanic tides the world over depress the ocean floor 0.3 Oceanography gives the answer. IGY data shows that oceanic tides the world over depress the ocean floors 0.3 of the increase in depth of water between low and high tides. The molten layer has to be beneath the ocean floor for the floor to be pushed into the earth, just as a few feet of water. Earth by just a few feet of water. As surely as there is life in the universe, there is in our Milky Way galaxy, and as surely as there is life in our galaxy, our solar system will traverse another magnetic null zone in it. Indeed, many more. This brings us to the subject of the next cataclysm. As mentioned before, Hale's mathematical analysis sets the Wisconsin era at 14,750 years ago. The last cataclysm, Noah or Antibishum's flood, would appear to be 6,993 years ago. Adam and Eve's cataclysm, the end of the Laurian Ice Age, appears close to 11,543 years ago. Hale's mathematics shows the null zone versus time structure to be helicoid. And as the universe approaches its half-life point, cataclysms occur at an increasing frequency with shorter era time periods between them. After the universe has passed its half-life, cataclysms occur at a decreasing frequency with time periods between them increasing in mirror image pattern of the first half-life of the universe. It appears that our universe half-life was in the middle of the Sudan era, which means that we're in the first of a longer eras after the Sudan Basin, which embraces the half-life point. Our Arctic era mirrors the Hudson Bay era, which was of 7,000 years duration. We can now reconstruct the table on page 24 to show 7 areas, 4 in the past, 2 in the present, and 2 in the future. We'll read from bottom up. Okay, so there's a chart on page 115. Check that out. Easier to just look at than have me read it. It wouldn't make sense. Of course, there were many eras preceding the Wisconsin era, and there will be an equal number following the unknown era. You can see that the dark period of no written history was the Sudan Basin era. Let's look at prehistory from a different point of view, from the standards of our present civilization. We can see that it takes over 5,000 years just for a man to stagger back to his feet through a Stone Age and forced ignorance. It takes him another 1,000 years to learn to travel intelligently, to begin to overcome superstitions, to establish worthwhile communications, to bury prudery enough to make any significant progress in medicine. The progress of civilization can be measured by the change in man's attitude towards women in childbirth. Read Devil's Drugs and Doctors by Howard W. Haggard, MD. I can remember when the obstetrician was considered the lowest of the low in the medical profession. The male inferiority complex is manifested throughout history, starting with the Old Testament and 7 centuries of the Inquisition, when 98% of the 3 million burned at the stake were women, through property rights, inheritance, and voting laws, through income inequalities, and through burgeoning rape worldwide. Has he outgrown it yet? If we look to our technical accomplishments, which have taken us over 6,900 years to achieve, think what we could do if we had 10,500 years. We would be in space as commonly as we walk around the block. Fossil fuels and nuclear energy would belong to the dead past. Man-made gravity, which we know how to accomplish right now, and natural magnetism, which we also know how to use right now, would be the means for propulsion, power generation, and communications, as we would have learned the process of nature significantly to duplicate them in controlled fashion for our uses. It appears from the legends passed on from the Caspian Sea and Wisconsin eras that man did just that with the 10,500 and 14,750 eras he had. Valmiki writes of Vimanas, of the Brahma weapon and Indra's dart, of celestial chariots and more, legends of Mu and Atlantis, of great technical achievements as well as moral perversions beyond comparison spring from the Caspian Sea era. A few legends carry over into the 7,000-year Hudson Bay area, showing some retention of knowledge through the cataclysm of 18,543 years ago. If we look to Nostradamus, we find that its predictions end about the year 2000 AD. Whether we accept him or not, Edgar Cayce's prediction predicts a cataclysm about the year 1999 AD. 1999. Hale's mathematics indicates one to be coming about year 2000. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not satisfied with these figures. To me, the cataclysm is due sometime between 7 and 200 years from now. If I had my druthers, meaning if the funding were available, I'd put the entire subject to an intensive, all-out applied mathematics program to determine as precisely as possible how much time we have before the next cataclysm. Then undertake an intensive study to determine what we must do in the time we have left to prepare for it. Wouldn't you?